Hi, and welcome to episode number 59 of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast, the show where I talk to introverts who grow their business and make a difference. As always, I'm Sarah Sinacroce, and I'm excited that you're spending your summer day with me, at least an hour of your summer day. Okay, gosh, today's guest, Michelle, was one of the first people I started following online when I started my entrepreneurship journey in 2006. I was just naturally attracted to her way of being and doing business. And it took me quite a few years to figure out that it's because she's a fellow introvert. And 12 years later, it's an absolute pleasure to have her as a guest on my podcast. I think you'll really enjoy this episode. So let me tell you a bit about Michelle. Michelle Shaeffer is the creator of Lingo Dynamics and the HookLine Dynamic app. She's passionate about helping mission-driven entrepreneurs build successful, profitable businesses that make a positive difference in the world. She's written 42 blog posts in a single day, mentored more than 15,000 bloggers through the Ultimate Blog Challenge, an extreme traffic adventure, published 1,000+ posts on her own blogs. A typical day in Michelle's life includes a whole lot of coffee, obsessive blogging and content creation, coaching fabulous entrepreneurs, working behind the scenes to support her awesome clients with their blogging and marketing, and sneaking a little bit of sci-fi in there somewhere. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Michelle Shaeffer. Michelle, how are you?
I am doing great. How are you today?
I'm good too. As we just said offline, I've almost finished my day and you just started yours. It's funny. Like with all the technology out there, there's one thing that will never change, which is time zones. I find that always fascinating.
Opposite sides of the world.
Yeah. And it hasn't always been like that for you, right? Tell us where you grew up and then where you are now.
Sure. So I grew up in a tiny little town in rural Alaska. Was there till I turned 18, went out to explore a bit. And right now, honestly, I'm doing kind of the digital nomad thing, traveling around, and I can run my business from wherever I'm at, which is great.
That's great. So are you in California right now or you're somewhere else?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm on the West Coast. I've spent the last couple of years bouncing back and forth between various places in the U.S. and Central America, and it's been really fascinating.
That's great. So besides the official bio that I just read in the intro, tell us a little bit about your story and yourself and maybe something that the introverted audience can relate to.
Sure. Okay. So, it's funny because you asked me before we got started of how much of an introvert I consider myself. And the behind the scenes, I guess, is, if you knew me when I was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, we won't go up to what age, but I was most likely to be found hiding under a table or somewhere else that nobody could see me or talk to me because I was that introverted. I was scared of pretty much everything around me. And it's been an interesting journey to learn how to take some of those natural ways of being and use it as a strength instead of allow it to be an excuse in my life, because it's very easy when you naturally just are drained by big crowds or a lot of people or some of those types of things to go, okay, well, this is the way I am. I can't change it. I can't do anything with this, and let yourself kind of off the hook for stepping into who you really can be. So a big part of my journey has been either how do I rewire this a little bit or how do I make it work for me? Because a lot of people who see me in person at an event or see me speak on stage, it's fascinating to me because they don't realize I'm seriously introverted. Because I've learned how in certain situations to project a different type of presence and focus on the right things so that I can do it. Now, I can't do it 24 hours a day, but I can do it for brief periods of time.
Right.
So I totally understand the difference when you're energized by big crowds or when you're drained by them.
Has your business and the way you do business as an introvert evolved over time? Because Maybe you can go into a little bit about,
Sure.
your business history, because like I said in my email, I've known you since your virtual assistant days, which goes back quite a long time, right?
Right. Okay. So I started my business in 2000. Officially, that's when I got the business license and all that set up. I was 19 years old. And I did start out doing like virtual assistant, website design, that type of work. In fact, I was so introverted and scared of the real life side of things. I started my business under a pen name because I wanted to keep a separation so that my online world and my real life world didn't collide.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yes,
Never heard of that.
It was
What was your pen name?
Michelle Shaeffer is actually a pen name.
Oh.
So yes, I started going by that in business and it stuck. And it's become a brand for me.
So I'm not going to ask what's your real name because you probably don't want to reveal that.
It's funny because something that started out as, kind of a protection mechanism really turned into a brand that I could play with and figure out, okay, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? Because when I started my business, the reason I got good at online marketing and driving traffic really was because I was so introverted. You would not have been able to pay me enough to get me to walk into a room and network with people. I was terrified of that. And still, it's terrifying. I've just learned to deal with it a little bit better. But it really became a strength because I was determined to figure out, how do I do this from a tiny little town in rural Alaska? How do I create something that I can help people, I can build a cool business around without having to do things in person? And so I got good at blogging, at driving traffic online, and some of those elements that I'm really thankful as an introvert, especially to have been born at a time where we have the internet and we have so many options that we can turn what some people might see as a weakness into a huge strength.
That's a great story. I did not expect that. I was not ready for that reveal. That's great. It's kind of like J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter, It's great. Wonderful. Okay, so you started out as a virtual assistant, then you got into the blogging, right? You were really known for blogging. And so tell us about kind of the transformation from blogging to what you do today.
Sure. So, it's interesting because the way that I fell into blogging was very accidental. It was actually, again, an outshoot of being as introverted as I am. And what happened was I was constantly answering the same questions for clients, for people that reached out to me of, I have a website because I did website design, right? And I help people with like e-commerce shops. What do I do to get people to come see it? How do I get traffic? And I was getting so many marketing questions. I was like, okay, well, let me just publish these somewhere online so I can point people to the link and I don't have to have so much one-on-one interaction with people. The assistant that I was working with at the time helped me get WordPress set up and suggested I put my articles there. It was like WordPress was really new at the time. So I started publishing my answers to questions, basically. In my mind, it wasn't even a blog. And then people started finding it from search engines and reaching out to me wanting to hire me because they saw I understood how to help them with things. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I can actually just write about things and people will find me, which for an introvert, that's like a dream, right? You don't have to go out there and market yourself. People find you. So I ended up kind of moving intentionally then into blogging and learning how to really do content marketing, which that's definitely evolved over the years because a lot of people, especially event organizers, they'll look at your online presence and go, oh, you've got really great info. You can share it in writing. Well, you must want to speak on stage. And I turned down invitations for a long time, honestly, to get on stage. I finally got on stage when a coach that I was working with kind of required it at one of his events. So it wasn't as much optional as it was, here, this is your next assignment. And my business has evolved from just the blogging and teaching content marketing to, at this point, I do a lot of webinars. I do a lot of trainings where I'm on camera. I do quite a bit of speaking on stage and in-person workshops as well, which 15 years ago, I would have told you would never, ever happen. I couldn't even picture that possibility for myself. And when we get to habits later, that's actually the one I want to share, was what changed that for me. But I mean, the first time I went on stage, and I have shared this story before, it was really funny because I was beyond nervous. I'm sure most of your listeners can identify with that. And before I was scheduled to go on stage, I'm watching the schedule and I'm watching my clock and I'm going, okay, remember to breathe, I will survive this. And no, about 10 minutes before I went on stage, I was in the bathroom puking my guts out because I was so incredibly nervous. I was like, how do I do this? How do I do this? And it was funny because at the same time that it was one of those like breakdown moments, I'm sitting there in the bathroom and, I'm going through what I'm going through. And I hear somebody in the stall next to me going through the exact same thing. And I realized it was the woman who had just gotten off stage, who's also very introverted, dealing with, she just came off stage and that's where she ended up. And so we had that, crying, hugging moment in the bathroom of, oh my God, somebody understands me. And it made a huge difference because I went, okay, she did this, I can do this.
Oh, that's
and I think that's one of our gifts as introverts is to be able to really observe, because we do tend to hang back sometimes, right? We're quiet, we're watching. And we can observe and see what's going on around us and really be a different type of support for someone just by saying, I see you, I understand you.
Right. It was a great
huge
moment also because she just already went through it, right?
Yes.
Because you're like,
yes.
Okay, if she can do this, then I can too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's been a recurring theme for me, is really watching what I see other people being able to do and going, okay, if they can get through that, I can get through it. And it's why I actually share stories like that, because I've had people ask me, they're like, why would you share that? Why would you admit that? I'm like, because if I can get through that, then I know other people can, and it will help them to understand what's possible for them. Because I think sometimes hiding things like I'm an introvert or I get really nervous about X, Y, or Z, it can seem like the logical thing to do because you want to show up and be professional and be perfect, but it's not what connects us with people.
Yeah, you just mentioned one of the introverted superpowers is that connection, right?
Yes.
And I think it goes together with, it's an overused word, authenticity, but that's really what it is. It's like, okay, I'm struggling and I'm telling the story about me struggling.
Right.
And, so that's really strong. What about, something that you are struggling with because you're an introvert? So, speaking on stage was something, but is there something else that you still see on a daily basis that makes it harder for you as an introvert?
Let's see. Oh gosh, where to start? I think there's a list for most of us. I struggle with talking about myself. Kind of stepping into the spotlight is a huge thing for me. I naturally want to do everything possible to avoid that. So that was definitely a daily struggle. I mean, even before I got on with you, I have to sit there and remind myself, here's the reasons I'm doing this, and go through that process in my head of, I'm going to show up because I can make a difference for people. I'm going to show up and I'm going to share and I'm going to do my best to be, transparent, to be authentic, to share value, because that's actually what I'm here to do, and I guess as far as, I know we'll get into habits in a minute, but that's one of the things that I have to constantly remind myself, why am I doing this? And when I can shift that, then I'm able to do those things that first thought sound impossible to me.
Yeah, it's so true. I think, like you said, every introvert struggles with that, and then some are better at it than others. But I think what we're actually really good at is putting other people into the spotlight. That's what I'm doing on this podcast, right? That's why podcasts are so great, because you get to just bring in other people. And yes, as a sideline, they hear my voice as well. What I'm really doing is bringing other people's stories in. And I think us introverts are really good at that, not just on podcasts, but just in general.
Well, and I think that's one reason that we actually have, you want to call it superpowers or things that really help us succeed as entrepreneurs, is really that idea of putting other people into the spotlight, of caring so much about other people's success, allows us to be really good at what we do, especially if we're in a career like coaching, consulting, that kind of thing, because we do naturally put the spotlight back on our clients, look for ways to help them, look for ways to build them up. And that only comes back positively for us in business.
Yeah, that's so true. In fact, I remember you had a few years back as well, this blogging challenge. I can't remember if it was 30 days or something. That was the initiative for me to start my LinkedIn challenge, which I've been running for many, many years, ever since you started the blogging challenge. That's awesome. And what I did there is also bringing other LinkedIn experts, because again, you don't want to just talk about yourself as an introvert.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, how could I do this? So I brought in other experts, and that also put my name, next to these bigger experts, and it's the best thing I ever did. So I want to thank you for that.
That's awesome. I'm so happy that was inspiration for you. And, I think what you said there is really, really important. A lot of us as introverts look at networking and go, oh my gosh, I can't do that. I don't want to give an elevator pitch in 30 seconds, try to sum up what I do. All of the pieces of networking. We're actually great at networking, just in a different style.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because what you just explained, that's the way of networking with people who are great at LinkedIn, who are other gurus and experts that you can put yourself next to and share that spotlight with. So it's not that we stink at networking. It's just we got to do it a different way that works for us.
Yeah.
And it actually works really, really well.
Yeah, so true. So true. It's just, like you said, it's not the typical networking event where you go into a room and you got to, work the room. Oh my God. That sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah. Yes, that's the kind of thing you dream about and wake up and can't breathe.
Exactly.
It's funny though, because that is like one of the main questions I ask myself, almost every day, multiple times a day, when I run into things that as an introvert start to give me that panic attack. I go, okay, how can I make this work? Instead of can I do it? I don't ask myself, can I do this? I ask myself, how can I make this work? So what do I need to change? Whether it's my mindset around it or my perspective, or whether it's the tactics of exactly how to do it, or whether it's getting to my goal in an entirely different way, I just ask myself, how can I do it? And that is what really has helped me when you look at the way my business has transformed from being completely behind the scenes as a virtual assistant, as a website designer, to kind of inching my way into the spotlight as a blogger, and then ending up on stage and doing what I do now. That's really what's allowed me to do it. Is the habit of asking that a little bit differently, not can I do this, but how can I make it work for me?
I think it's the for me part that's important.
Yes.
Because just because everybody does it one way doesn't mean that you have to do it that way either. You can do it, with your rules and differently. And oftentimes you'll be surprised that people actually like your way better, even though the rest of the world does it their way.
Absolutely. And, that's one of those things that I think sometimes we hear growing up, or, people around us tell us that being extroverted is better for whatever reason. And we tend to think of introversion as something that's less, and maybe not even accept it about ourselves. But if we can just embrace that instead and go, yeah, this is who I am. It's okay for me to be this way. Not only is it okay, but I actually have special gifts that are different than yours. And all I have to do is learn to use them. Right. Because when we approach it that way, which is one reason I love the angle you have on your podcast, because you're looking at it as what's your superpowers. Mm. And if all of us, introverted, extroverted, whatever labels society tends to put on us, just look at ourselves and go, you know what? I am awesome the way I am, and I'm going to make things work for me. It entirely changes the way you show up in the world.
Yeah, so true. Let's talk about the habits. I like to call them the golden nuggets. So the first one is a personal habit that you think contributes to your success. You already mentioned a few, but maybe you have another one in mind.
Sure. So, I think one of the habits that I have that has been incredibly helpful for me in kind of going through just the different phases in my business and really becoming who I want to be and showing up how I want to show up has been that habit of asking myself, how can I do this? And being open to things. Like, I used to very quickly reject a lot of things. Like, I would not reach out and risk things. I'm still terrified to risk things, but I do it anyway, right? Sometimes you work through the fears, be afraid and do it anyway. About a year ago, actually, I was having a conversation with a friend who does event planning, and she told me about New Media Summit, which was an event for podcasters, and suggested that I get on the phone with Steve, who hosts the event, and talk to him about it. Well, at the time, I didn't have a podcast. I had my blog and, I had a lot of traffic to that. As I got on, had a conversation with him. We talked about me starting a podcast and being at the event. And I said yes. He invited me to be there as an icon. And I was then absolutely terrified. I wanted to shut down and hide under my blankets for the rest of the day because I was like, what am I doing? I have to get on stage, and I have to start a podcast. Part of the way that the event worked the first time he did it was for several hours at a time, the people who were icons, we stood at tables And one person after another, there were like 150, 160 people came up to you and pitched you on why they should be a guest on your podcast. Now, as you can imagine, for someone who is introverted, the thought of 160 people talking to me for 2 minutes each within a few hours is absolutely overwhelming.
Makes my head spin.
Right? So I'm sitting there thinking, how am I going to do this? Right? How do I keep my energy up? How do I stay present and really listen and be there? As I was preparing, because the first day was training and teaching, it was fantastic, by the way. If you ever get a chance to go to one of his events or anything he's hosting, absolutely worth it. But we got to day 2 when the pitches were going to start. And I remember waking up that morning and thinking, okay, so how do I get through this? And this actually is the habit that helps me the most. And it was flipping what I was thinking about. Instead of thinking about myself and allowing my emotions and my feelings to get in the way of what I was there to do, I went, no, I am here because I'm about to hear 150 people tell me what they're most excited about and passionate about in life. How amazing is this going to be? And really flipping the way that I was looking at it, putting the focus back on them, which as introverts we are good at, right? We're good at focusing on others. So allowing myself to look at it from that different perspective of how do I show up and serve the person that I'm here to serve? How do I show up and deliver value? How do I show up and be the person in the room who's actually encouraging these people? Because when you start focusing on the other person's emotions, and I put myself in their shoes and I go, oh my God, I would be terrified if I were on the other side of this table. I have to give my pitch 40 times and hope these people say yes.
Right.
So instead of focusing on how I was feeling, stepping out of that and going, understanding how the person across the table from me is feeling, I am going to show up and be the most encouraging person in this room. I'm going to remind them how amazing and awesome they are and what a great job they're doing. And when I got through that day, I actually, at the same time that I did feel absolutely drained, I was energized. When we showed up the final day for a private mastermind with Steve, my feedback was, this has been one of those days that reaffirms my belief in humanity. I felt amazing walking out of that room, hearing these people share what they were so passionate about. So the habit, to kind of go back to your question, is putting myself in the other person's shoes and really remembering why I'm doing something. Because when I can do that and shift the focus off myself and off my emotions and how I'm feeling, I can show up differently and I can push myself kind of out of my little bubble to be able to do bigger things.
I like that. Has a lot to do with empathy, which is one of the superpowers that we have as well, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes so much empathy that it gets too much empathy.
Yes.
So then we need to think about our boundaries. But I think that's a great reminder to, when it gets overwhelming for us, and just think, well, I'm just here to serve and I'm just here to listen, which is another great introverted strength, is just listen and show empathy.
Well, and one of the things about empathy, because it can be absolutely overwhelming when you're absorbing all of the emotion and excitement or whatever those feelings are, is to really think of yourself more as a mirror than as a sponge. Because we do tend to absorb those kinds of feelings and it can be overwhelming. So one of the habits that I have is I ask myself, I don't even know how many times a day, is this my emotion or have I taken on somebody else's? And what do I need to do to help reflect back to them either the positivity or to help them shift it? And so just being really aware of when you are absorbing other people's emotions versus when they're your emotion. It's tough to stay conscious of that, I think, for some of us who are very empathic. But as we develop that skill and learn how to better project and control the emotion, it really is a superpower.
Yeah, that's a good question to remind ourselves if it's really our emotion or somebody else's.
And reframing the emotions is another thing. And it's funny because it goes back to speaking on stage. I spoke on stage once, and when I came off, there was this woman in the audience who, she was an introvert too, and she looks at me and she goes, honey, you've got to ground yourself, right? So we're having this conversation, and a friend walks up to us and he said, how are you feeling right now? And I said, I feel like I have a bunch of butterflies in my stomach, right? That's how a lot of us describe being nervous. And he goes, okay, how do you feel when you're excited? And I stopped for a moment, and it was this huge aha for me because I went, oh my gosh, this feels like excitement. It also feels like nervousness. You can pick what emotion you assign to the feelings you're having physically. So instead of allowing myself to go, I have butterflies in my stomach, I feel like I'm going to throw up because I'm nervous, I go, I have butterflies in my stomach, I feel like I want to jump up and down because I'm excited. So kind of reframing and reassigning that can really help, because we know when we're empathic and we have very strong emotions, if we let ourselves focus on the negative one, we can spiral internally, right? But if we stop and focus, no, I want to feel this way, we also have the power to make that decision. So I guess that's another really helpful habit.
Yeah, good reframing reminders.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing those, Michelle. Let's talk about the two other golden nuggets. So the first one is like an internet resource, something that you use for your business every day.
Okay, so that's a really great question. I started to go over these and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many. What do I narrow it down to?
Which one do I pick? Yeah.
Which one do I pick? I think some of the tools that I use most, actually, one that I use a lot is HookLine Dynamic, which allows you to see what the feelings behind words are. And especially for empaths and people who are introverted, it can be really helpful because we care how we come across. We want our communication to be positive, to be exciting, to be empowering. And so I love that tool because it allows me to look at words and pick the ones that are going to have the emotional effect that I want them to. So I use that one a lot.
Okay, I'll make sure that I put that in the show notes. So Lingo Dynamic, it's called.
Yeah, the tool itself is called HookLine Dynamic, and it's a free tool that you can put in words and see where they come up on the scale.
That's great. Yeah, it made me smile because we can spend hours just to make sure that the words are correct in an email that you just send to your best friend.
Right, which, it's funny because I love the opt-in you have on your site. That's the email scripts, the templates for like how to say no powerfully, respectfully, because I was like, oh, this is brilliant. I know so many people who need this, right?
Yeah, that's another one saying no. So what about a book that you would recommend and why?
Okay, so this was another hard question. I was looking back through my Kindle and trying to figure out if I had to pick just one book, what it would actually be, because I've read so many good books over the past little bit. I think one of the ones I read recently that I really loved was Choose Yourself from James Altucher. And that one was fantastic because it really helps, I think, you shift your mindset a little bit around just how much power of choice you have. And whether you're introverted or not, we sometimes get caught up in the idea of this is the way the world works, this is the way I am, so I'm limited by that. Mm-hmm. And really, you're not. You have the choice of how you want to respond to that. And, really, you have the power to change it as well. That was a really interesting book, especially for somebody who's looking at transitioning into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we said earlier. It has to work for us, right?
Yes.
Just because the rest of the world does it this way. Just this morning is a good example. What happened is somebody asked me for coffee meeting. It was a prospective client. And I decided a long time ago, if I do coffee meetings, they have to be at a location that's close to my house. And so obviously she wanted to meet in the city, and that would mean like half hour in traffic and then finding parking. And this was a, good prospective client. So I'm like, do I make an exception? What do I say? She'll think I'm rude, blah, blah, blah. In the end, I stuck to my guts and I'm like, I explained, I prefer to meet. And she's like, oh yeah, that's fine. Let's choose another day. So, sometimes it's about changing the habits that everybody else thinks, oh, you have to do these 2-hour lunch meetings. Well, maybe that's not what works for you. So,
yeah. Can I recommend one more book while we're at it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, because I couldn't narrow it down. The other one is Real Artists Don't Starve by Jeff Goins. For introverts, especially if you struggle with the idea of asking for a sale, of asking for money or to be paid for what you do when you do something creative, that book will totally change the way you look at it.
That's great. Who's the author? I didn't hear that part.
Jeff Goins. It's Jeffgoins.
Okay, I'll make sure to link to that as well. Every now and then there's a guest who doesn't read. I think I've had 2, but most introverts are just like reading so many books. And not to be judgy or anything, but the 2 were guys, really techie guys. Yeah. So because otherwise, that's what we do, right? We read. Yeah. We read a lot.
We do. And I think that's another thing that's really a superpower when you're introverted is the ability to learn from someone else's experience, because as you read it, you can experience it yourself in a different way than some people can. Some people have to learn by making those mistakes, by going through the experiences, and they learn amazingly well that way. But for some of us who are introverts, who are readers, we can put ourselves in that situation as we read about it, and we learn it in a different way, but it really enables you to move forward by learning from somebody else's experience.
Yeah, that's true. Wow. This has been such a great conversation, Michelle. I really appreciate having this time with you. I always ask the last question. It's a bit of a woo-woo question for depending on the people. What are you grateful for today or this week?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. And I think the thing that comes to mind right now for me is one of the things I am most grateful for actually is the opportunity to do things like this, to show up and as an introvert, still share my experience, my gifts, the things I can that are valuable with others. And the way I look at things in the world is I really think we all have this domino effect. And it's easy to forget that just one thing we say, just one time we choose to be brave and show up can affect somebody else's life in an amazing way. And so I'm thankful to have that opportunity and to be able to look at life in that way of everything that we choose to do, every time we choose to be brave, we're inspiring someone else to be brave too and to make a difference too. And that is amazing.
That's great. Yeah. As you know, on my website, I talk a lot about making a difference, and it's really important to me. And I'm grateful to you for having the same values and also wanting to make a difference. That's great. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me, Michelle.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
It's been a pleasure. That's it for this episode of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, review on iTunes would really make my day. Or if you feel too scared about doing that, just send me a personal email. And I would love to hear from you at sarah@sarahsandacroce.com. You can find out more about Michelle by going to michelleshaeffer.com. And the link is in the show notes or on the description. So even if you're listening to a mobile device, you can click on the description. You'll find all the clickable links there. Also check out Michelle Shaeffer's podcast with the title The Art of Giving a Damn. This is Sarah Sandacroce signing off from the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast. Remember, you need to use your unique introverted superpowers in order to make a difference. Talk to you soon.